Good morning, everyone, and greetings from my home office, and welcome to today's episode of Home Office Talks. Thanks for joining. In this series, we connect home offices from around the world with mine here in Cologne, Germany, to learn insights on how to recover from the corona pandemic, not only in good health, but also in a sustainable way. This is now the 12th episode, which kind of indicates how long the pandemic has been. You can check out previous episodes on Covestro's YouTube channel. As always, this is a live broadcast, so you have the opportunity to ask live questions. Please type them down below, and we'll get to them towards the end of the talk. We appreciate also any commentary along the way, which I'll be reading directly from my screen. Today we talk about renewables and their role in the circular economy. I am very honored to host the chief executives of two truly game-changing companies in this field. Peter Vanacker from the Finnish energy company Neste, a pioneer in renewable fuels and other feedstock from waste and residues, and Markus Steilemann from Covestro, the inventor of many technologies which are improving the sustainability of the chemical industry. So, let me now open the lines to Espoo, Finland, and Cologne, Germany, where we should find the two gentlemen at their homes. And there they are. Crazy. The communications works. Peter and Markus, welcome.
Yes, thank you.
And we even have audio.
Good morning, Nico. Thank you.
Thank you joining. This is now the first episode from Finland. You know, Finland is my home country, so we need to start with some Finnish. We just have to do it. Peter, you have lived, I think, about a year or so, maybe more in Finland. How do you like it up there? Any favorite words?
Yeah, I mean, time is flying. I mean, extremely fast. It's almost 2 years now that I'm here living in Finland with my wife and our little dog. Of course, I mean, Finnish language is an extremely difficult language. If you think, I mean, Mandarin and Japanese is difficult to learn. I mean, imagine, Finnish language. Anyhow, gonna do you a pleasure, Nico. Olemme intohimoisia luomaan lapsillemme terveellisemmän planeetan. I hope you understood that I was saying we are passionate at Neste about creating a healthier planet for our children. And hyvää huomenta. Good morning.
Hyvää huomenta, Peter. Mukavaa nähdä sinut lähetyksessä. This is so great to have a Belgian-German CEO talking Finnish. Markus, over to you. How is your Finnish? You have to work with crazy Finns, I know. Sorry about that, but how about otherwise?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And as Peter said, his Finnish is way more advanced than mine. But I can also, let's say, at least technically speaking, about polycarbonati and polycarbonate actually. And I'm not even able to say good morning. But I hope you forgive me for that, Nico and Peter. So.
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay, that's part of Finnish. Now let's get to the more serious.
Yeah, let's finish. Is that okay? So that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Now to the more serious stuff. You both are leaders of large international organizations, and of course, as chief executives, my question to you is: what does it take, from your point of view, today to lead a global organization in these circumstances? Let's start with Peter.
Well, of course, it's clear, it's quite challenging. We are not prepared, as CEO for that, even if you have experienced 30 years careers and you have had financial crisis and all these kind of things. So quite a lot of things are new, but there are a couple of things I think that are very important and what we consider at the company. First of all, is a lot of communication, more communication even than before, different ways of communicating, and safety together with the well-being of our people. These are the top priorities that we have set since the beginning of this COVID-19 crisis, and since it started in China and then countries like Singapore, we were already at the beginning of January deeply involved in what was happening. So immediately starting to take the right actions in place to make sure that the people are safe, not just our people, contractors, people working with us, our partners, and also that the well-being, because the way of working is completely different. And then the second point maybe I would like to make is that it's finding the right balance between the short-term measures in navigating through this crisis, and then on the other hand side, making sure that we continue to make progress on the implementation of our mid to long-term strategy.
Markus, what's your point?
I mean, Peter covered it almost all, and I can only build on what he has said. So for us, the experience level also was limited because we have never seen that type of crisis, and we have never seen that extent globally, at least not in the time where I have lived. Some people actually say that it might remind us of the Great Depression that we had in the last century, in the 1930s. But I was not around. Many of us have not been around. So in that sense, we are absolutely not unprepared, but it in the end of the day came to us as a surprise. And for us, the first thing was health of our employees and making sure that we keep them safe and that we protect them. And once we have guaranteed that, we needed to, that means as many other corporations, we looked at cash, we looked at our cost positions, and we also looked what would it mean directly for our customers and how we could still continue to support them in these very difficult times where supply chains were disrupted, where production was under big pressure because there were not sufficient workers sometimes available for turnarounds. There were not sufficient, let's say, opportunities to keep the personnel, let's say, at the right number of people in the plants. So that was really a big challenge. And now, as Peter said, we are focusing also to managing still through the crisis because we are far away from being out of the crisis. And then secondly, looking at the long-term perspective. And that's why we together here, Peter, talk for a more sustainable future for our children, as you have voiced it out so nicely and admirably in Finnish. So I'm still impressed.
Thank you, Markus. But absolutely, I mean, it's like you say, I mean, quite a lot of disruptions in the supply chain, and navigating through that period of time is extremely challenging. But so far, I think when I'm looking at what Covestro has been able to accomplish, also what our company has been able to accomplish, manage that really well, I mean, during that period of time, to keep our customers as well happy and keep the economy also running. Yeah.
So thanks. And for the audience, sorry for the bad connection we have with Markus. We are in Cologne, and sometimes the connections are not as good as we can see from Finland, but we can hear you nice and well. Again, I remind the audience to write questions. We are able to see them and then get back to them towards the end of the talk. So from Corona, and I think it's a tough job for you guys leading big organizations in terms of Corona, but also at the same time building the sustainable drive and coming out of the crisis in a more sustainable way. So Peter, as a Finn, of course, I know Neste from its gas stations, but over the last decade, your company has gone through a big transformation, and Neste is continuously named among the most sustainable companies. Could you share some insights how this came about?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Nico. And it all started, I mean, with articulating a purpose. And at the time, it was a purpose of leaving a healthier planet for our children. We have changed that to creating. But at that time, it was leaving a healthier planet for our children. And originally, of course, the heritage of Neste is a classical oil refinery that was created to give Finland some independency from Russia on one hand side and Sweden on the other hand side. And it was created about 70 years ago, this company. Now, the last 10 years, then the management, together with the board, had then reconsidered and said, look, should we not move more into the area of renewables? And if you have a company and you're in a small country in terms of people living in the country, then you need to have it from innovation. So the company always had a very high degree of innovation. It was really part of the DNA, also in the classical oil products, the kind of products that were being developed and brought to the market. So they strengthened that innovation department by starting to develop a technology to use waste and residues, fatty acids, triglycerides, and produce, because they were in the fuel business at the time, the most obvious was then produce diesel out of it. And of course, I mean, nobody was waiting for that. We were talking about 10 years ago. So there were investors that didn't understand it. Even people in the company didn't understand it. But the stamina that was being used in continuing to invest and go for it, even when the times were very difficult and the company almost went bankrupt at a certain point in time. But keep on going on the same way, building up the assets, investing multiple billions in building up these assets to produce. And so also working with governments, what is needed in terms of regulation. And that has made us today, this is the biggest part, I mean, of our business. We are by far a market leader on a global basis, about 60% market share in renewable road transportation, major focus renewable diesel. And as we know, I mean, the electrification and fuel cells in heavy duty transportation, which is the biggest part of diesel consumption, is not so simple to accomplish. The lifetime of heavy duty vehicles is somewhere, I mean, between 12 and 20 years. So if you want to achieve, I mean, greenhouse gas emission targets, then we need to also take, I mean, the solutions that are readily available today. And that has created quite some traction. So a couple of years ago, we then looked at, okay, we have now a very strong position in the marketplace. Should we not go broader and create a second wave? And that's where we started looking at, okay, what about the aviation business? So we developed the right products. In the meantime, we're selling them to leading airlines, Lufthansa, KLM, just as a couple of examples, but of American airlines in the United States as well. Because also here, I mean, reducing greenhouse gas emissions for the airline industry is quite difficult, I mean, to accomplish with other technologies. And then we looked also at polymers and chemicals and said, look, if we are producing renewable hydrocarbons, why not use these renewable hydrocarbons that are based upon waste and residue to build up circularity in the industry and help the leading companies in the polymers and chemical space to also achieve their targets in order to produce their products, I mean, in a sustainable way. So that's where we started looking at, on one hand side, the renewable hydrocarbon, and on the other hand side, also chemical recycling, or I prefer to call it, I mean, advanced recycling of what I would call waste carbon. And carbon is a good material. We are made out of carbon. If there is no carbon, we have no life on the planet. The point is we need to recycle it over and reuse it over and over again. So today, and even a lot of people don't know us that well, we're the largest company in Finland. Market capitalization these days, 27 to 28 billion euros. So we're not a small company anymore, but still, I mean, our brand reputation is very well known in the markets that we are addressing, but we are expanding on a global basis so that our brand reputation will also be known outside, let's say, of the industries that we are serving.
So that's, I think, a fascinating story, and it really also shows how it's quite lonely to be an innovator. Also lonely to be think about 10 years ago and sustainability. And Markus, maybe you can comment on that, because beyond and next to energy companies, also chemical companies are faced with prejudice about the sustainability of their business, and also Covestro has been a pioneer in creating these technologies. So can you, Markus, tell a little bit about Covestro, how that has changed its processes and its operations to become more sustainable, also from the very early times, just like Peter just said?
Yeah, that is absolutely true what Peter said, and it is a journey. And the journey for us started many years ago, actually back in the 1990s already. At that time, still being part of Bayer, there were first attempts to build more sustainable plastic components, and there were different concepts that were followed through. One concept was, for example, using bio-based raw materials from plants, for example, to be transferred into plastics. There were also concepts out there for plastics that could biodegrade. So many of those concepts have unfortunately not been successful at that time. However, the fundamental principle today comes back again on the table. And that fundamental principle is has been described by Peter. We're talking all about the management of carbon, which is so crucial, and it is the life element itself. No life on the planet would exist without carbon. And given that, carbon for us is absolutely crucial. And in recent years, there has been a lot of scrutiny, for example, on one material, and that is plastics, because we have mishandled plastics at the end of its lifetime. And that has made, meanwhile, in the perception of many people on the planet, made plastics the public enemy number one. And what we forget in this context is how beneficial plastics is also for human life. If you think about medical applications, if you think about day-to-day applications for energy savings, like we see it in our buildings, like we see it in our refrigerator. We talk about clothing. I mean, many shoes actually that are produced worldwide using polyurethane materials. So that means plastics. And we're also talking about applications that go into day-to-day life, mobile phones, laptops, and whatever. And not to mention coatings. Actually, everything we have when you live in a modern society, in a house, furnitures, everything is coated, not to mention cars, planes, and so on and so forth. So our entire life has been particularly enhanced simply due to the use of plastics, and modern life and healthy life without plastics would, from my perspective, not be even thinkable anymore. Nonetheless, that must not distract us from one of the key challenges, and that is how we manage waste and how we manage particularly plastic waste. And in that context, circular economy kicks in. And we at Covestro were thinking already quite since a number of years, how can we actually challenge this? How can we change this? And how can we move forward? And one of the key aspects here is going for renewable energy, because the chemical industry is an energy-intensive industry. So number one, let's go for renewable energy. Number two is let's go for raw materials that are renewable. And that is exactly where Neste and Covestro come into play, because Neste does something which results in a product that Covestro needs as a raw material. And then Covestro is also investing in to understanding how recycling could look like. What does it mean? Today, and Peter mentioned that, a lot of recycling is done mechanically. That means we chop plastics into pieces, we make it hot, we melt it, and then we produce new items out of it. However, over time, this plastic deteriorates, so you cannot have the same property. So what is the solution? And Peter mentioned that, advanced recycling. So break it down, like nature does it, into smaller components. The chemists call these components molecules, and those molecules actually can then be rebuilt into fresh new material that has no loss in properties, that's fully functioning and provides the same properties to consumers like the first generation did, and so will be the third, the fourth, and the fifth generation if you go for this advanced recycling. And this is exactly, I think, what both companies are looking into. How can we close loops, and how can we make the materials from the property perspective as good as they were the first time, and on the other hand, make sure that more of these materials, in the end of the day, all of those materials are going back into the loop. And that is exactly what we're trying to solve. What does it mean for the consumers? The consumers have products that still benefit them a lot for a modern and sustainable life. They have products with a significantly reduced carbon dioxide footprint, and they have products where they can be sure that at the end of the lifetime, they will go back into the cycle, and they might see them one day back again when they have been recycled. And I think these are the key aspects that brought our two companies together.
Mm-hmm. And it's crazy to think that if you think about the oils from restaurants which are being collected and then repurposed, that one day those waste oils could become a skylight in your car, which is made of polycarbonate. So it's really crazy to see the amount of innovation which is happening among the chemists. If we take it maybe one notch higher from the consumer level and go to the societal view, because there's a lot of societal discussion now about the future. The European Green Deal outlines the Commission's goal here in Europe towards becoming the first climate neutral continent by 2050, and they really want to enshrine climate neutrality into law. Von der Leyen talks about being a man on the moon moment, and she's actively boosting funding and investments for more environmentally friendly and recyclable materials, and of course with that improved recycling processes. She also talks about decarbonizing energy intensive industries, even increasing emission reduction targets despite of Corona. So I think it's clear what Neste and Covestro are doing is exactly changing that paradigm of take, make, and waste into a more circular approach. So if we look at this from that perspective, what is the role of partnerships generally to drive circular economy? Peter, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, thanks. Nico, it's a very good question, because it's easily said that we want to achieve, carbon neutrality, CO2 emission neutrality, greenhouse gas emission neutrality. But in order to achieve that, there is quite a lot of hard work that needs to be done to build up that circularity. And therefore, I always say companies should look at themselves not as competitors, but as collaborators. I think having the right partners, one company on its own, I don't believe can do it. You can be a forerunner, you can set a certain pace, but if you're not willing to cooperate on one hand side, with highly innovative research centers, universities, very smart and passionate people working there, and then on the other hand side, working together along the value chain with the different partners that are there, if it are brand owners or, for example, companies like Covestro, that you see it comes from the top, the commitments. There is this aspiration, there is this commitment to really make circularity happening and reduce, let's say, the greenhouse gas emission impact on society. Now, having said that, I'm extremely positive if I see what the momentum is right now in Brussels and in a lot of governments, because it's exactly the right thing to do in raising the bar even higher than it was already before. The bar was by 2030 to also already reduce greenhouse gas emissions up to let's say in most countries 30%, and now raising it to 50% and having this neutrality target by 2050. I think that is really the right, that's what we need, also from the authorities, from the regulators, that they raise the bar very high. And then of course, in addition to that, they are a very important partner, so they need to also establish the right mechanisms to make sure that economically this is happening. Another point I want to make is that from time to time, and here I'm on purpose a little bit critical, but from time to time you see that there is polarization between different technologies, this technology being better than another technology. I think if we all want to achieve circularity, we should take the technologies that are available, that are scalable, and that are economically feasible, whilst continuing to invest and having the funding in innovation, so that these other technologies that may be scalable and economically feasible in 10, 15, or 20 years from now, that they will add to the pie. What I see a lot happening, these days, is that you have very high standards in greenhouse gas emission reductions or circularity, but then immediately there is a polarization between, yeah, but I want to have this technology and not the other technology. But unfortunately, this technology is not yet there yet in terms of readiness in order to go to the market. And it may be in 10 years, but it's not today. So I think that's an important message as well. Collaboration, having the right partners, but also focusing on what we today have readily available and build upon that.
Markus, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter has addressed already so, let's say, important aspects in this context. So I would like to add a few. How I look at this, what is currently going on in Europe, that is a very positive signal, what the European Union tries to do. But let me start again already where I see, and Peter also said that on purpose to be a little bit critical. What is missing currently is not only what Peter mentioned in terms of technology openness, but that the right framework is also consistent. We experience, for example, that we're focusing currently almost everything on the ecology. We must not forget in this context that we need social contribution as well. And in addition, we also need to continue to boost the economy. So all three aspects, the ecology, the economy, as well as social aspects, would need to be covered. So I would not call it a Green Deal. What we need is a future sustainable deal, because all three aspects together will only lead to a successful example and also successful future in this context. And there's few examples. The energy prices, and I'm just talking from a German perspective, but it is not entirely different in the rest of Europe. Energy prices, and here in particular electrical energy, is simply too expensive, as most of the processes, if we want to change them to a more sustainable future, we need to electrify them. And to electrify those processes, those high energy consuming processes, we need cheap electrical energy. And given the current prices that we have for energy, for example, in Germany, we are incompetitive if we would switch from today's energy supply, which is steam, which is natural gas, which is sometimes crude oil, all into electrical energy. That would first and foremost simply not be feasible due to the amount of energy we need, but it would also create a lot of trouble in terms of the costs that are associated to this. And that is something where on the one hand, we try to make energy more expensive, we try to make it more green, and at the same time, we try to be more competitive. And that overall doesn't add up. And that is something that also legislation, the respective governments need to accept and also need to tackle, because otherwise we will have a really hard time, if not to say we will maybe fail to build a more sustainable future for Europe with this huge energy transition. Another concept that Peter related to is the acceptance that if you want to run things in circles, you need to make also sure that you get access to the end-of-life materials. And we have currently huge issues, for example, to get access to plastic waste. And also how we can use plastic waste. Just example, for food packaging, it is not allowed to use recycled plastics, or the respective legislation is so complicated that it is almost practically impossible to use recycled plastics in food packaging. That also significantly reduces the opportunities to use recycled plastics. And the third topic in this context, I truly believe, and maybe I'm arguing a little bit pro domo, that plastics is amongst the most sustainable materials from an energy perspective, from a resource perspective. The challenge that we have not tackled is we do not manage waste particularly well. And here, by the way, it is not plastic waste, this is our entire waste that we have. So we need to close loops. And in that context, the collaboration with companies like Neste is absolutely crucial, because they show how you could at least partially close loops, how you could partially go for renewable raw materials with existing technologies, and what additional technologies are there that we can now jointly build and make them really large, leverage them, scale them up, because that is desperately needed. So I'm very positive about what is going on. Yet I also have some wishes here for the, let's call it, political framework.
And if you allow me, Nico, I mean, just to leverage a bit upon that, I'm a stubborn optimist. If we just look back, I mean, then 10 years ago, if we talk about the used cooking oil, so lots of countries are cooking in the restaurants with oil. I mean, that used cooking oil, you cannot use it anymore. I mean, for food purposes, of course, it ended up in the drain. Now, 10 years later, with all the hard work together with our partners that we have done, we are gathering in China, in Australia, in the United States, in South America, starting with 20 liters of used cooking oil and aggregating it up to millions of tons that we are using as a raw material to produce renewable hydrocarbons out of it. So I'm a stubborn optimist. I do believe that also this is possible. It will take quite a lot of hard work, but it is possible also with other wastes like plastic waste, for example, so that we avoid that plastic waste actually ends up where it shouldn't end up in the ocean or in rivers, but actually is that very good source of renewable carbon is then being collected. And there we work together, of course, with quite some leading polymers companies, just like Covestro, but also we have started, to align with companies that actually are experts in waste collection, like Remondis, a global German-based company, like Ravago, a Belgium global company leading in mechanical in a mechanical recycling of waste plastic already today. But that's what it needs, coming back to the original discussions. You need to line all these different parties up along the value chain, and then I'm sure it will be possible.
And I think that's very promising to see your optimism, because companies can move so much, but at the same time, it takes a lot of other stakeholders to make the wheel turn. Let's go to questions. Thank you for the audience for bringing in great questions. We'll go right ahead and start with the first one from JJ. JJ used to be an acronym for a famous Finnish Formula 1 driver, but let's not go into that. The question sounds, and it's for Peter. Where does Peter view chemical recycling to be as a technology in 2030, bearing in mind that new tech to handle difficult materials may arise by then, or difficult materials themselves may decline in a quantum?
Yeah, as said, we need we need different solutions to address and tackle the issue that we have on the table. And mechanical recycling will, of course, continue to be one of those solutions, but also, as Markus said, you cannot recycle everything in a mechanical way, or you cannot reuse it and eventually for pharmaceutical or food purposes. So you need to go to other ways of recycling the material. And then we go more in the chemical space, and there are different types of technologies that can be taken, not to get too detailed, on liquefaction or depolymerization, different avenues, how to get to that. And some avenues are better fit with certain waste than other avenues. I think in 2030, it will be very important. We have made a commitment that we will replace crude oil in our existing refineries by liquefied waste plastic to produce sustainable fuels or renewable hydrocarbons out of it, of at least, 1 million tons of waste plastic. But this is just an aspirational target. If we can do more, then we will do more. And just to show a little bit where we are standing on that, it comes back also to what Markus said. It's still difficult to find, waste plastic at this point in time. We had scheduled a first trial run in one of our specialty refineries in Finland based upon liquefied waste plastic. And actually, we've had a couple of times now to postpone that industrial scale pilot run because we didn't have sufficient liquefied waste plastic. But looking forward in 2030, it will be one of the major solutions to address the issue on circularity in plastics. And you see a lot of activities ongoing, partners just like Covestro, startup companies. So I'm quite confident about that.
Thanks, Peter. And the next one is for Markus. But before I go there, Markus, you want to comment on chemical recycling 2030? What does it look like from your point of view?
Peter is definitely the expert, given the portfolio, but also his, let's say, background, because he's an engineer. I'm just a chemist, So, and as one of our former colleagues used to say, an engineer does for a penny what every stupid can done for $1, So, and so Peter Peter is, I think, in that sense more qualified. The view I have on advanced or chemical recycling is we're just mimicking nature, because we must not forget that nature does it all year round. Nature is building huge and complex molecules and huge things like trees, humans, animals, whatever. And at one point in time, everybody goes back into the circle, so to say. Every life goes back into the circle and is totally decomposed and then built into something entirely new. So if you consider this principle of many circles of nature being intertwined, that is exactly what we try to do with advanced recycling. So we do not have to put plastics into plastics again. We can also use carbon dioxide. We can use, for example, old cooking oil, transform it into plastics, transform it into fuel, transform it into whatever material you can think about that is based on carbon. And this general principle that it has not to be like for like, but that is all about closing the loops, I think that is absolutely essential. And here, coming back to what Peter said earlier, it doesn't count which technology. It does count that we are open to technologies who are helping to solve the problem and not preemptively shut them down. And I think that is the point that Peter has wonderfully made once again, and we must keep this spirit.
Thanks, Markus. Let's take the next question, which is from Jan. And we'll get it up on screen. Jan is asking about the corona effect to plastics industry. What's your take on the positive aspects of the pandemic on the chemical industry, for example, on the increased demand for disinfectants, polymers, face shields, etc.? Markus, you want to comment on that?
Well, I think that's very difficult. Yes, sure. I think that's a very difficult twist, to be honest, because to see positives, let's say, in a global pandemic like the COVID-19 pandemic, for me is actually very difficult. What it has, however, led to, and I think that is indicated in the question, it has shown us once again how relevant also the chemical industry is to tackle these type of crises. And not only in this regard, but as I said earlier, a modern life without high-tech materials and chemicals is hard to imagine. Just go 300, 400, 500 years back, people were about to have an average life expectation of 35 years. If you were 40 years, you were already considered to be extremely old and lucky person. And today, I would say many people consider 40 years to be just the start for the next career, so to say. And that is also partially because we have significantly ramped up hygiene standards, and those hygiene standards also have been significantly driven by insights into research, into development from the chemical industry. If you look today at food preservation and how we keep actually food fresh, a lot of this is due to materials. A lot of this is also due to chemistry, not to mention also how we have increased yields of crops and so on. I know that there's a lot of negative sides that we still have to tackle and where we have to get better, but let's not forget the situation from which we are judging today the world is a situation that is only possible because of what we have achieved so far, and now we need to move it to the next level. That means keep the positives on the one hand, but also tackle the negatives that we have, admittedly. And in that sense, we could tell in our particular business that the medical business, the business for disinfectants has seen an increase, definitely. But to be very honest, nothing to be proud of. We just see it as a duty. We just see it as an obligation to help wherever we can, and that's it.
Right. So an eye-opener in many ways. Let's take the next question, which is from Gilroy to Peter. With the technology that Neste has, is there any plan for expansion in Asian countries like India, Thailand, Taiwan, etc., which are heavily dependent on fossil fuels? Peter?
That's a very good question, and thanks, for that question. As you know, one of our world-scale plants that we have is actually in Singapore, and we're actually in the process of investing another 1.4 billion euros in building the biggest ever renewable hydrocarbon plant that has ever been built on this planet. that work is ongoing. Of course, in terms of market developments, there are a couple of Asian countries that are a bit more advanced and looking at circularity. So these are going to be the first markets that we are addressing. But I must say, on the other hand side, I mean, there's still a long way to go and still quite some hard work also from our side to educate some markets, in Asia, but also in Latin America, that actually they should have the right regulation in place, and they should drive also for lower greenhouse gas emissions on one hand side and more circularity on the other hand side. The main markets will continue, I mean, for the short term to mid-term, let's say the next 5 years, definitely the western part in North America, from British Columbia to California, Oregon, and then of course the entire geographically European region. And then other markets, I think, I mean, they will start developing only 5-10 years from now.
Thanks, Peter. Let's take one more question before we run out of broadcast time and out of your busy schedules. This is a tough question because it's a very broad question, and you guys are both have a broad perspective to this. Let's put the question up on screen from Anonymous. What is the strategy for both companies to be carbon neutral in 2050? Quite a long time from now, because circular economy is not going to be enough to that respect. Peter, if we start with you.
Well, let's differentiate first of all between handprint and footprint. So handprint is the greenhouse gas emission reductions that our customers are making because of the products that they are using, that we are supplying to them. If you look at last year, all the products that we did supply to our customers, then we had almost 10 million tons of CO2 emission reduction at our customer site, which is about the carbon footprint of 1.5 million European average citizens. And we have a commitment that we want to ramp that up to at least 20 million tons, so double from last year, by 2030. So that's the handprint. Now, the footprint is how much carbon emissions do we have by producing those products in our manufacturing sites? And there, we're not waiting until 2050. We have made a clear commitment that we want to be greenhouse gas emission zero by 2035. And we have about, in the meantime, 60 projects ongoing in order to enable that. And this goes a bit to what Markus has said before. On one hand side, can we get green electricity? So together with partners, we're building up windmill parks. There is quite a lot of wind in certain regions, and definitely in the northern part of Europe. And actually, as we speak, expanding that with another partner. But then, of course, also working very heavily on, for example, can we produce, green hydrogen? So hydrogen that is based upon green energy, solar industry energy, or wind energy. And here we have made an equity investment in a German company, actually, Sunfire, which is, in our opinion, having developed a leading technology, low-cost technology, electrolysis technology to produce green hydrogen. And if you continue based upon green hydrogen, you then go into synthetic fuels, again, leading to greenhouse gas emission reductions of 90% compared to fossil-based products. So we're looking always at the two sides, handprint as well as the footprint.
Thanks, Peter. Markus, your take on the question?
Yeah, so it is a similar picture with, let's say, slightly different scope that we have for Covestro in this context. What Peter has lined out is similar true for us. We're looking into different, let's say, areas of our carbon dioxide footprint. There is a very technical definition. I like this hand and footprint much more, Peter. I have to say that's brilliant. We call it scope 1 and scope 2. It's very technical, but I just to continue to do so. So scope 1, carbon dioxide emissions, for us, it is above roughly 3.5 million tons that we actually every year emitting in carbon dioxide, just based on our own production. We have additional 3.5 million tons of carbon dioxide that we are emitting based on the energy that we are buying via electricity. And then there is a very rough cut number, and again, very rough cut number, which is our suppliers, which is about 20 million tons. That is actually what we assume, which we call scope 3. And that is exactly, if you really look from a very broad and long-term perspective, what we try to tackle with the concept of circular economy, because we understand it broader. So first and foremost, we want to go for renewable raw materials, and that would significantly lower our carbon dioxide footprint. So we are the handprint of what Peter just has mentioned. So if we buy, for example, and collaborate with Neste on some of the materials, for example, for our polycarbonates, we could significantly reduce Peter's handprint and our footprint by buying different raw materials. We also, and I outlined that earlier, want to change immediately and as quickly as possible wherever we can to renewable energy. And that's why we have just closed a few months ago the largest ever commercial supply contract for offshore wind energy with a leading company from Denmark called Ørsted, and that will cover 6% from 2025 of our global electrical energy demand, and counting, because we are currently in discussion with many other European but also offshore suppliers in the US as well as in Asia, to increase significantly the amount of renewable energy that we use to supply energy to our plants. And then, not to forget, we must make sure that we close the loop at the end of the life cycle. Many of our products are staying for 50 years in use and only then are not used anymore, and we need to get access to that. So one of the key issues is, how do we close the loop? How do we get access to those materials, which are very valuable raw materials, where we currently lack the access? So there's many, many more things, and that's why I'm pretty much convinced, even though I cannot tell you exactly how the targets look like for 230, 240, 250 for our company, we're still working on that, that we will actually achieve these very ambitious targets.
Thank you, Markus. And to the audience, just stay tuned until 2050 to find all the things that are being done to get to that goal. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much, Markus, for joining Home Office Talks on this Wednesday morning. I know you guys are on a very busy schedule. Thanks again for taking your valuable time. Hope to see you again sometime in real life and not just only in virtual studios. And all the best to you. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, Nico. Bye-bye, Peter. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
It was my pleasure, Markus. Thanks.
Same here, Peter.
Thanks for joining the Covestro Home Office Talks again. And again, thanks for the great questions. Tune in again next Monday afternoon. Then we'll talk about blockchain solutions with a Dutch startup, Circularize, for plastic traceability. And again, just like now, enabling a circular economy. With us will be the founder of Circularize, Mr. Mesbach Sabur, with our own Burkhard Zimmermann, Head of Resin, Digital, Transformation and Sustainability at Covestro Business Unit Polycarbonates. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye.